Picture yourself slumped on a straw-stuffed mattress in a drafty medieval manor, circa 1200 CE, the air thick with the scent of smoky tallow candles, damp wool, and the faint whiff of a chamber pot someone forgot to empty. The fire's crackling, the wind's howling, and somewhere a monk is scribbling canon law that makes sure you're stuck with your spouse until one of you keels over. In medieval Europe, divorce was about as likely as a peasant winning a jousting tournament, technically possible, but good luck convincing the church. These marriage rules, enforced by priests with a penchant for paperwork, were a tangle of divine will and bureaucratic nonsense, leaving couples grumbling into their ale. We're not here to rewrite canon law, heaven forbid, but to chuckle at the absurdity wrapped in the hum of a medieval village. So fluff your imaginary bolster, ignore the bleating sheep outside, and let the rustle of parchment, the flicker of a candle, and the church's iron grip lull you into a cozy, amused snooze. We're diving into 10 reasons why splitting up was a pipe dream, each a peek into the medieval world's obsession with eternal vows. From muddy villages to grand cathedrals, we'll wander through the rules, rituals, and ridiculous hoops couples faced, savoring the scent of incense, the clink of chalices, and the sheer audacity of a system that thought, till death do us part, was non-negotiable. These laws were a mix of faith, control, and a dash of "you're stuck, deal with it." Grab a mental mug of mead, settle in, and let's giggle our way through the medieval marriage trap, each reason a sleepy, snarky gem. Imagine lounging in a chilly stone church in Canterbury, 1150 CE, the air heavy with the scent of incense, wax, and the faint tang of a monk's unwashed habit. A priest is droning about marriage as a sacrament, his voice echoing off the walls like a lecture you can't escape. The air's buzzing with the rustle of woolen cloaks, the clink of a dropped rosary, and the sighs of a couple who just realized they're stuck for life. The Catholic Church, per Gratian's decretum, declared marriage a divine bond, and divorce about as welcome as a heretic at a bishop's banquet. Let's dive into this holy gridlock, letting the flicker of candles, the whiff of myrrh, and the priest's stern sermon make you chuckle as you drift toward sleep. The Church's big idea, cemented by the 12th century, was that marriage was a sacred contract, glued by God and unbreakable by mortals. Once you said "I do" in front of a priest, you were locked in, no take-backs. The air was once thick with the scratch of quills on canon law texts as clerics like Gratian hammered out rules that made divorce a sin. Couples, shivering in pews, probably muttered, "Forever? I didn't sign up for that guy's snoring." The church didn't care marriage was for salvation, not your happiness. Life around this rule was rigid. Priests sniffing out sin, policed vows, the air heavy with the chant of Latin and the scent of wax. Nobles, desperate for alliances, gritted their teeth through bad matches, the air tense with the clink of goblets and the hope of heirs. Peasants, stuck in huts, had no choice but to endure, the air warm with the smell of stew and the grumble of "he forgot to milk the cow again." The community nodded along, whispering over ale about couples who tried to sneak a split, the air thick with tallow fumes, and the kind of laughter you get when the church plays marriage cop. The sacrament was ironclad, and as the sermon fades, let's shift to Annulments, the only loophole with a catch. Picture yourself in a bishop's stuffy chamber in Paris, 1250 CE. The air warm with the scent of parchment, ink, and the faint whiff of a cleric who's been praying too long to bathe. A noble couple's pleading for an annulment, their lawyer sweating as he argues they're distant cousins, or the marriage was never consummated. Wink. The air's buzzing with the rustle of legal scrolls, the clink of a silver coin for bribes, and the bishop's skeptical HMPH. Annulments per canon law were the only way to undo a marriage, but good luck, it was like convincing a dragon to share its gold. Let's wade into this legal maze, letting the flicker of a lamp, the scent of wax, and the bishop's raised eyebrow make you snicker as you sink toward slumber. An annulment wasn't divorce. It declared the marriage never existed, like erasing a bad day from the calendar. Grounds were narrow: consanguinity, two related relatives, non-consummation, or fraud, purgation. The air was thick with the scratch of quills and the smell of ambition, as lawyers spun tales of "oops, we're cousins." Nobles desperate to remarry probably muttered, "I knew that wedding wine tasted off." Peasants rarely tried too poor for the fees, and the church loved dragging it out, the air tense with the hope of a miracle. Life around this was a circus. Courts, packed with scribes, buzzed with arguments, the air heavy with the rustle of vellum and the scent of ink. Bishops, sniffing bribes, weighed cases, the air warm with the clink of coins and the murmur of "he's lying about the cousin thing." Wives, stuck waiting, probably rolled their eyes, the air thick with the scent of wool and the effort of not throttling their spouse. The community loved the gossip, snickering over mead about annulment scandals, the air thick with ale fumes, and the kind of laughter you get when a lord's stuck in court. Annulments were a tease, and as the chamber fades, let's shift to consanguinity, the church's favorite excuse. Imagine standing in a muddy village square in Normandy 1100 CE, the air damp with the scent of wet straw, bread, and the faint whiff of a cow who's wandered too close. A priest's lecturing a couple about consanguinity, explaining their marriage might be void because they're fifth cousins twice removed. The air's buzzing with the clink of a dropped bucket, the rustle of tunics, and the couple's confused wait. What? The church's obsession with bloodlines per canon law made divorce impossible, but annulments tricky, as everyone seemed related. Let's dive into this family tree tangle, letting the flicker of a torch, the scent of mud, and the priest's mug chart make you chuckle as you drift toward sleep. Consanguinity rules tightened by the Fourth Lateran Council, 1215, banned marriage within 4 degrees of relation. Basically, anyone you shared a great-grandparent with. The air was thick with the drone of priests and the smell of wax as they traced genealogies like medieval detectives. Couples, especially nobles, often discovered they were too related when a better match appeared, muttering, "Guess we're cousins, time to split." The church, suspicious, demanded proof, the air tense with the rustle of scrolls and the hope of a loophole. Life around this was chaotic. Scribes, sketching family trees, probably grumbled, "Everyone's related to Charlemagne." As they worked, the air heavy with the scratch of quills and the scent of ink. Nobles hired genealogists, the air warm with the clink of coins and the murmur of "find me a cousin." Peasants, less bothered, still faced priests poking into their lineage, the air thick with the smell of dirt and the effort of staying married. The community loved the drama, giggling over ale, about accidental cousins, the air thick with fumes, and the kind of laughter you get when your family tree's a mess. Consanguinity was a trap, and as the square fades, Let's shift to non-consummation, another shaky escape. Picture yourself in a candlelit manor hall in York, 1300 CE. The air heavy with the scent of wood smoke, ale, and the faint whiff of a lord's questionable hygiene. A couple's in front of a bishop, awkwardly claiming their marriage was never consummated, their faces redder than the wine. The air's buzzing with the rustle of velvet, the clink of a chalice, and the bishop's skeptical snort. Non-consummation, per canon law, was a rare annulment excuse, but proving it was like convincing a monk you hate mead good luck. Let's slip into this awkward charade, letting the flicker of candles, the scent of wax, and the couple's nervous stammering make you snicker as you sink toward slumber. Non-consummation meant the marriage wasn't completed, so it wasn't valid, per Gratian. Sounds simple, but the church demanded proof. Think medieval doctors poking around or witnesses swearing nobody heard bed springs creak. The air was thick with the scratch of quills and the smell of ink as clerics recorded these claims. Couples, desperate for freedom, probably muttered, "We just didn't, okay?" While the bishop smirked, the air tense with the rustle of scrolls and the hope of a miracle. Life around this was cringe-worthy. Courts, packed with nosy clerics, buzzed with arguments, the air heavy with the clink of coins and the scent of wax. Wives claiming he couldn't faced snickers, the air warm with the rustle of gowns and the effort of not laughing. Husbands, protesting their innocence, probably wished for a quick death, the air thick with the smell of ale and the murmur of gossip. The community loved the scandal, chortling over bread about bedroom failures, the air thick with fumes and the kind of laughter you get when a lord's ego takes a hit. Non-consummation was a long shot, and as the hall fades, let's shift to the church's power, the real marriage gatekeeper. Imagine sitting in a grand cathedral in Rome, 1200 CE, the air heavy with the scent of incense, stone, and the faint whiff of a bishop's overdone perfume. A council's debating marriage laws, their voices echoing like a choir of grumpy bureaucrats. The air's buzzing with the rustle of robes, the clink of a crozier, and the murmur of God's will thrown around like a trump card. The Catholic Church, per texts like the Corpus Juris Canonici, controlled marriage like a medieval HOA, making divorce a fantasy. Let's dive into this holy power trip, letting the flicker of torches, the scent of myrrh, and the bishop's smug decrees make you chuckle as you drift toward sleep. The church claimed marriage was God's domain, and they were the gatekeepers. Divorce was heresy-only annulments, with papal approval, got a pass, and even then, you needed a miracle or a fat purse. The air was thick with the chant of Latin and the smell of wax, as clerics like Innocent III reinforced the rules. Couples stuck in loveless matches probably muttered, "God's will?" More like the bishop's ego. The church's power was absolute, the air tense with the weight of divine law and the hope of exceptions. Life around this was rigid. Priests policing parishes sniffed out sinful separations, the air heavy with the clink of chalices and the scent of incense. Nobles needing papal favors sent bribes, the air warm with the rustle of silk and the murmur of deals. Peasants too poor for such games grumbled through their vows, the air thick with the smell of mud and the effort of endurance. The community whispered over mead about couples defying the church, the air thick with ale fumes, and the kind of laughter you get when God's lawyers call the shots. The church's grip was tight, and as the cathedral fades, let's shift to social pressures. where divorce was a scandal. Picture yourself in a bustling market in Bruges, 1350 CE, the air thick with the scent of wool, fish, and the faint whiff of a merchant's spilled ale. Gossips flying about a couple daring to separate, their names dragged through the mud like a bad minstrel's tune. The air's buzzing with the clink of coins, the rustle of cloaks, and the snickers of traders who love a scandal. In medieval Europe, per chronicles like Froissart's, divorce was a social death sentence, even if you could swing an annulment. Let's wander into this gossip fest, letting the flicker of a torch, the scent of bread, and the market's snarky chatter make you chuckle as you sink toward slumber. Society saw marriage as a glue for families, alliances, and land deals. Splitting up, even legally, meant ostracism. Nobles lost allies, peasants lost neighbors' trust. The air was thick with the drone of gossip and the smell of wool, as communities judged every move. Couples, eyeing freedom, probably muttered, "I'd rather face a dragon than the village gossips." The church's rules amplified this, making separation a public shame, the air tense with the rustle of tunics and the hope of saving face. Life around this was brutal. Nobles, risking their status, faced cold shoulders at court, the air heavy with the clink of goblets and the scent of wine. Peasants, shunned at markets, bartered in silence, the air warm with the smell of dirt and the effort of keeping friends. Women bore the worst, labeled as loose or barren, the air thick with the murmur of she's to blame. The community thrived on the drama, snickering over ale about failed marriages, the air thick with fumes, and the kind of laughter you get when scandal's the main course. Social pressure was a trap, and as the market fades, let's shift to legal battles, where annulments were a nightmare. Imagine sitting in a cramped ecclesiastical court in London, 1280 CE, the air heavy with the scent of ink, vellum, and the faint whiff of a lawyer's sweaty ambition. A couple's arguing for an annulment, their case buried under piles of canon law thicker than a castle wall. The air's buzzing with the scratch of quills, the rustle of scrolls, and the judge's exasperated sigh. Annulments, per the decretum, were a legal marathon, with more obstacles than a knight's tournament. Let's dive into this courtroom chaos, letting the flicker of a lamp, the scent of wax, and the lawyer's wordy brawl make you snicker as you drift toward sleep. Annulments required proving the marriage was invalid, like consanguinity or coercion, but the process was a slog. Lawyers, per court records, spun tales of forced vows or hidden cousins, the air thick with the drone of Latin and the smell of ink. Couples, drained by fees, probably muttered, "I'd rather stay married than pay this guy." The church, loving control, dragged cases out, the air tense with the rustle of vellum and the hope of a verdict. Life around this was exhausting. Courts, packed with scribes, buzzed with arguments, the air heavy with the clink of coins and the scent of wax. Nobles hiring top lawyers faced years of delays, the air warm with the rustle of silk and the murmur of he's lying. Peasants, rarely able to afford it, stuck it out, the air thick with the smell of mud and the effort of endurance. The community loved the spectacle, giggling over mead about courtroom dramas, the air thick with ale fumes, and the kind of laughter you get when lawyers run the show. Legal battles were a maze, and as the court fades, let's shift to noble marriages, where politics trumped love. Picture yourself in a grand castle hall in Castile, 1400 CE, the air heavy with the scent of roasted venison, wine, and the faint whiff of a noble's overdone perfume. A lord and lady are toasting their marriage, but it's less about love and more about land deals and alliances. The air's buzzing with the clink of goblets, the rustle of velvet, and the murmur of advisors plotting the next dynasty. For nobles per chronicles like Orderic Vitalis, divorce was impossible, because marriage was politics, not a rom-com. Let's dive into this aristocratic tangle, letting the flicker of torches, the scent of spices, and the nobles' forced smiles make you chuckle as you sink toward slumber. Noble marriages were contracts, tying families, lands, and power. Splitting up risked wars or lost titles, so annulments were rare and messy per canon law. The air was thick with the drone of advisors and the smell of wax, as lords schemed to keep alliances intact. Couples stuck in loveless matches probably muttered, "I'd rather joust than share a bed with her." The church, eyeing political stability, backed this, the air tense with the rustle of scrolls and the hope of peace. Life around this was intense. Courts, packed with scheming vassals, buzzed with gossip, the air heavy with the clink of coins and the scent of wine. Ladies managing households played nice for alliances, the air warm with the rustle of silk and the effort of diplomacy. Lords dodging annulment scandals bribed bishops, the air thick with the smell of ambition and the murmur of deals. The community loved the drama, snickering over feasts about noble mismatches, the air thick with spice fumes and the kind of laughter you get when love's a chess game. Noble politics were a lock, and as the hall fades, let's shift to peasant realities, where divorce was a dream. Imagine huddling in a smoky peasant hut in Bavaria, 1350 CE, the air thick with the scent of stew, straw, and the faint whiff of a goat who's wandered inside. A couple's bickering over who forgot to feed the chickens, but splitting up? Not a chance. They can't afford the church's fees or the village's judgment. The air's buzzing with the crackle of a fire, the rustle of wool, and the grumble of "you're stuck with me." For peasants per manorial records, divorce was a fantasy, too poor, too judged, too busy surviving. Let's slip into this rustic grind, letting the flicker of flames, the scent of bread, and the couple's grumpy banter make you snicker as you drift toward sleep. Peasants married for survival shared labor, kids, land. The church's rules per Gratian applied, but annulments were out of reach, costing more than a year's harvest. The air was thick with the drone of priests and the smell of mud, as villagers nodded to vows they couldn't escape. Couples sharing one-room huts probably muttered, "Till death, hope it's quick." The community, tight-knit, shunned separation, the air tense with the rustle of tunics and the hope of harmony. Life around this was tough. Markets where gossip spread buzzed with tales of unhappy couples, the air heavy with the clink of pots and the scent of fish. Women spinning wool swapped stories of enduring husbands, the air warm with the clack of spindles and the effort of keeping peace. Men plowing fields grumbled through their vows, the air thick with the smell of dirt and the murmur of complaints. The community chuckled over ale about that bickering couple, the air thick with fumes and the kind of laughter you get when everyone's in the same boat. Peasants were trapped, and as the hut fades, let's shift to rare successes, where a few beat the odds. Picture yourself in a bustling monastery scriptorium in Florence, 1450 CE. The air heavy with the scent of ink, vellum, and the faint whiff of a monk's spilled wine. A scribe's recording a rare annulment case, where a clever couple somehow convinced the church their marriage was a mistake. The air's buzzing with the scratch of quills, the rustle of scrolls, and the monks, how did they pull this off? Chronicles like those of Salambane note a few who escaped the marriage trap, but it was like winning medieval Powerball. Let's dive into these rare wins, letting the flicker of a lamp, the scent of wax, and the scribe's shocked scribbling make you chuckle as you sink toward slumber. Successful annulments were miracles, usually for the rich or cunning. Nobles per records might prove consanguinity with a forged family tree, the air thick with the clink of bribes and the smell of ambition. A rare peasant with a sympathetic priest might claim coercion, the air tense with the rustle of vellum and the hope of freedom. Most failed, but the few who won, like a lord citing pre-contract to another bride, probably smirked. Take that, canon law. The church, grumbling, let it slide if the price was right. Life around this was a spectacle. Courts, packed with onlookers, buzzed with gossip, the air heavy with the clink of coins and the scent of ink. Lawyers, spinning wild tailies, earned cheers, the air warm with the rustle of silk and the murmur of they did it. Communities, hearing of successes, swapped stories over mead, the air thick with the smell of ale and the effort of dreaming big. The community loved the rarity, chortling over feasts about that lucky couple, the air thick with spice fumes and the kind of laughter you get when someone beats the system. Successes were unicorns, and as the scriptorium fades, let's wrap up with a final reflection, tying this marriage mess together with a smirk. Picture yourself now leaning back in a soft chair in your own home, perhaps with a mug of tea beside you, the hum of an appliance in the background, and the faint glow of a phone charging nearby. The modern world hums with a sense of personal freedom so ordinary that we scarcely notice it. Marriage, love, and the possibility of divorce are choices wrapped up in civil law, personal happiness, and cultural debates. But if we tilt our minds back toward medieval Europe, the contrast becomes almost dizzying. Then the thought of leaving a spouse wasn't just frowned upon. It was a cosmic impossibility, a door locked by priests, sealed with incense, and guarded by the fear of eternal damnation. Comparing their world to ours is like comparing a walled monastery to an open city, one stiflingly enclosed, the other sprawling with possibilities. In medieval Europe, divorce was hemmed in by religious law, particularly canon law, which declared marriage indissoluble. Once you said, "I do," it wasn't simply a social contract, but a sacred vow stitched into the eternal ledger of God Himself. Today, most marriages are seen through a civil lens. A legal bond, yes, but one that can be unstitched by court order, often with forms, lawyers, and sometimes awkward property division. The Church no longer holds absolute authority over marriage in most parts of the world. Religious marriage remains important for many, but civil courts, not priests, decide if couples can part. This shift is seismic. What once required a bishop's nod or a papal decree now requires in much of the world a filing fee and a judge's ruling. Imagine the tension of a medieval peasant couple who despised each other but had no means of escaping their vows. They lived under the same smoky roof, ate from the same rough wooden bowls, and tolerated each other's quirks because there was simply no alternative. Today, people in many places leave relationships over far less, from disagreements about chores to irreconcilable lifestyle differences. Dating apps exist to offer seemingly endless options, whereas a medieval villager's choices were restricted to neighbors within a walking distance of a few muddy miles. The contrast is sharp. The medieval world forced endurance, while ours permits escape. Sometimes too easily, critics argue. In the Middle Ages, annulments were the only technical escape route, and they were often limited to the wealthy and powerful. They required convoluted excuses. Maybe the couple were distant cousins. Maybe the marriage was never consummated. Maybe one partner had been coerced. Lawyers spun tales of entangled bloodlines like medieval soap operas. Today, annulments still exist, but in most jurisdictions they're rare legal quirks, usually dealing with fraud, incapacity, or bigamy. For the vast majority, divorce is straightforward, legally accessible, and no longer cloaked in scandal. The fact that a modern couple can quietly sign paperwork, divide assets, and move on is worlds apart from the medieval spectacle of bishops, bribes, and court gossip. Yet, while our systems are different, one common thread ties the medieval and modern experiences: social judgment. In the medieval village, gossip was merciless. A couple separating, even under church approval, could find themselves ostracized, whispered about, and judged for weakness or sin. Today, though we pride ourselves on freedom, social scrutiny still lingers. Divorced people, especially women, often face stigma in certain cultures. Tabloids feed hungrily on celebrity breakups, dissecting divorces as medieval villagers once dissected annulments over mead. We may not fear excommunication, but we still fear judgment from peers, family, and society. The methods differ, but the instinct to judge others' private relationships remains stubbornly human. Noble marriages of the Middle Ages provide another sharp comparison. For aristocrats, marriage was never about personal joy. It was about dynastic survival, political alliances, and land consolidation. A princess marrying a prince was essentially a treaty in silk and lace, binding kingdoms and armies. Divorce threatened alliances, risked wars, and endangered dynasties. Today, political marriages still exist, but they're hidden under modern trappings. Think of business dynasties united by strategic unions, or celebrities marrying across industries to consolidate fame. While most of us marry for love, echoes of political marriage remain in arranged marriages, elite unions, and even in the way many still seek advantageous partnerships. Whether financially stable spouses, socially respected ones, or professionally ambitious matches. We may not speak of dowries and papal dispensations, but Tinder bios and LinkedIn resumes often echo the same instinct: to tie ourselves to someone who improves our prospects. For peasants, marriage in the Middle Ages was about survival. Two people joined forces to share fields, care for animals, raise children, and endure the grind of subsistence farming. Divorce wasn't only forbidden by church law, it was economically unthinkable. How could one person till the fields, gather harvests, and survive without the other? Today, marriage has shifted in meaning. Economic partnership still plays a role, raising kids, pooling resources, paying rent or mortgages, but survival no longer demands it. A single parent in a modern city may struggle, but survival is possible. Government assistance, jobs outside the home, and modern conveniences soften the harsh necessity. The medieval peasant saw marriage as the difference between life and death. We see it increasingly as a choice between companionship and independence. The medieval obsession with consanguinity, banning marriage between cousins up to the 4th degree, also resonates oddly with modern times. Then genealogies were traced like labyrinths, with priests gleefully disqualifying unions. Today, while most countries legally permit cousin marriage, social taboos linger. People might wrinkle their noses at the idea, even though it's far less regulated than in the Middle Ages. The difference lies in enforcement. No modern government scours your family tree to block your marriage. In medieval Europe, the priest acted as genealogist, detective, and judge, often unraveling matches when political winds shifted. Today, family gossip might disapprove, but civil authorities rarely interfere. The non-consummation loophole also provides a fascinating comparison. In the Middle Ages, proving a marriage was incomplete was humiliating and nearly impossible. Couples dragged before bishops had to endure invasive questions, medical examinations, and whispers about their private lives. Today, intimacy issues remain private matters. While annulments may cite incapacity, most legal systems don't pry into the bedroom unless one partner insists. And yet, public fascination with intimacy remains. Modern tabloids and reality shows dissect bedroom habits with as much curiosity as a medieval gossip circle. The theater has changed from the church court to the digital screen, but the appetite for scandal remains much the same. The church's iron grip on marriage is perhaps the most striking contrast. For centuries it monopolized the rules, with priests as enforcers of divine law. Divorce was not simply a personal issue but a spiritual crime. Today the state has claimed that role. Civil courts, judges, and legislatures decide divorce law. In secular nations, religion has little say, but in others, such as in Islamic, Hindu, or Catholic majority societies, religious authority still heavily influences the process. So while Western Europe and North America emphasize freedom and personal choice, echoes of medieval rigidity persist globally. A woman in a conservative religious community today may face hurdles not unlike those of a medieval villager. Stigma, restrictions, and dependency on authority figures to grant or deny her freedom. Another modern comparison lies in gender. Medieval women bore the brunt of marital permanence. They were often blamed for barrenness, accused of weakness, or trapped in abusive marriages with no escape. Today, women in many countries have the legal right to initiate divorce and protect themselves with alimony or child custody. Yet, the echoes of medieval inequality linger. In some parts of the world, divorce still disproportionately damages women's reputations. Custody battles remain stacked against them, and economic vulnerability often discourages them from leaving unhappy unions. The past is closer than we think. Social pressures in both eras highlight continuity. The medieval villager mocked couples who tried to separate, turning their misery into tavern chatter. Today, social media serves the same role on a grander scale. Instead of whispered gossip in smoky taverns, we see viral posts, comment threads, and public judgments played out before millions. The medium has changed, but the instinct to scrutinize others' love lives persists across centuries. The rarity of annulments in the Middle Ages also finds a strange modern counterpart in high-profile celebrity divorces. Just as medieval nobles needed wealth, influence, and papal approval to escape bad matches, today's celebrities often endure highly publicized, lengthy and costly divorces that seem far beyond ordinary reach. Meanwhile, for everyday people, divorce is relatively accessible. In this sense, the medieval hierarchy still echoes. Those with power endure public spectacle, while ordinary people slip quietly through the system. And yet, perhaps the most poignant comparison is psychological. In the Middle Ages, couples learned endurance. They made peace with loveless marriages, sought humor in misery, and leaned on community or faith to carry them through. Today, we often chase happiness, discarding relationships when dissatisfaction looms. There's no moral judgment in the contrast, but it reveals two very different philosophies. The medieval mind saw permanence as unavoidable, forcing resilience. The modern mind sees freedom as attainable, demanding fulfillment. Each has its strengths and weaknesses. The medieval couple endured suffering but built endurance. The modern couple avoids suffering but often risks instability. If we step back, the broader comparison becomes clear. Divorce in medieval Europe was entangled with faith, politics, survival, and shame. Divorce today, in much of the world, is entangled with law, economics, children, and social judgment. One world trapped people in permanence. The other often tempts people with impermanence. Both worlds reveal the struggle of human beings, navigating the complexities of love, duty, and freedom. And as you sit now, perhaps adjusting the blanket on your lap or listening to the faint hum of traffic outside, it's worth reflecting on how astonishing it is to live in a world where personal choice in marriage is possible. Medieval villagers would have seen it as unimaginable luxury, the ability to choose, to change, to seek happiness. Yet we often take it for granted. Their sighs and smoky huts and cathedrals echo faintly in our divorces, breakups, and social debates, reminding us that while the structures have changed, the human heart, restless and hopeful, has not. As the hum of medieval life fades, the clink of chalices, the rustle of wool, the scent of incense and slightly burnt stew, let your mind flop into the quiet, like a peasant after a long day's plow. We've wandered through the church's iron rules, loophole tangles, and social traps that made divorce a medieval myth. Their world was a maze of vows, priests, and gossip sharper than a knight's lance, yet it was also a place where couples, noble or not, made do with grim humor and stubborn endurance. Picture yourself now tucked into a soft bed, the air still and the chaos of their time far away, there grumbles a distant chuckle. These marriage laws, rigid and absurd, remind us that even the Middle Ages couldn't tame human messiness. Let the details slip away, like a candle flickering out in a drafty hall. The smoky cathedrals, the muddy markets, the taste of ale and ambition, they fade into the background, leaving only the peace of this moment and a lingering smirk. You've journeyed through a world where love was locked in holy red tape, its priests' stern chants and couples' sly schemes keeping its story alive. Now it's time to rest, to let go of the medieval mayhem and sink into calm. Close your eyes, if you haven't already, and let the gentle absurdity of history lull you into sleep, safe in the silliness of now.